Managers. What is the worst excuse an employee has used to call off work? I think this might be relevant, kind of the other side of the coin. Back in the day when I was working at Cookout, I walked in about noon, had to stay till 10 p.m. I was there, I was working, but I wasn't happy about it. I was working the grill, and my boss comes by and says, "Josh, you look unhappy. What's up?" I chuckled and said, "If I'm being perfectly honest, I always watch the Twilight Zone marathon on New Year's Day. It's like a tradition. Just a little bummed, but I'm fine." He walked away, went in the back, and made a phone call. Comes back over to me, asks for the spatula, and says, "Go home and watch the Twilight Zone. Dave is coming in. I got this till he gets here." I was like, "Are you serious right now?" He just smiled and said, "I fucking love the Twilight Zone. Go enjoy not being a manager." Great fucking guy. When I was managing in a fast food restaurant, this one guy told me that he needs to go home early. I asked him why, and he said because Raw wrestling was on tonight. Then he explained to me who was fighting, and then told me the story of why they were fighting using quotes and sound effects. He was 43. Well, I'm not a manager, but I had to call my boss and tell him my best friend, and I wouldn't be coming in for a couple days. It went pretty much like this. "Manager, you can't call in for him, me, but dash manager. He has to call in for himself, or he's a no-call, no-show, me dash, Bert, you don't understand." Manager, "Now I'm gonna be short 2 servers. Jesus, what's the excuse anyway?" Me, "Joey is laying in a hospital bed next to me because someone tried to kill him. He's stable, but we're waiting to hear from the surgeon about pulling out the broken glass that's lodged in his jawbone. Here, let me send you a picture of his slashed up face." Manager, No, that's not necessarily. Just try to find someone to cover one of your shifts. Is he all right?" Me, "No, Bert, he is definitely not all right." Click. I used to work at a well-known multinational coffee chain whose name starts with S and ends in Tarbucks. The stores are open on Christmas Day, but no one can be scheduled for the shift. You volunteer, good pay, and crazy tips, so they usually have no problem. Anyway, this one guy from another store volunteered to work Christmas Day. Christmas morning, the store gets a phone call from his MOM saying he's not coming in because she doesn't want him to work on Christmas. Working in tech in California. I came in one day, and my boss told my co-worker won't be coming in anymore. I asked why, and he said because of the nuclear power leak in Japan after the earthquake. She was fearful of radiation coming overseas, so in urgency they jumped on a plane and went to the East Coast for safety. She asked permission to work abroad. My boss said we can give you 1-2 weeks there, and she said no. Never saw her again. They didn't have any job out there. I don't know what they did. They did have a kid to feed, though. About 15 years ago, I was running a fast food restaurant and had this lady that worked for me that was a really good employee. She never called out and always did a great job, so when she called out, I was really worried. She called at around 9 a.m. and said she wouldn't make it in today. The call went about like this. Employee, "Hey boss, I ain't coming into work today," in a nervous voice. "Boss, are you okay? You've never called in before." Employee, "Yeah, the doc says I'll be fine. I was bleeding out of my butthole last night, so I went to the ER. They said I had a fizzle or something like that. I guess I have 2 assholes now, boss. Feel better and let me know when you can be back." She healed up and came back to work about a week later, and I never could look her without thinking of her saying she had 2 assholes. Not a manager, but at my retail store we had a new manager transferred in from another store. He worked for a week with us, and then went on vacation. This is normal, by the way. Usually when a manager transfers from another store, they take a week of vacation before coming. But this guy took it later. Anyway, he said he was taking a trip to Puerto Rico. A week goes by, and then another. He was only supposed to be gone for 1. We start calling him, wondering what's going on. No answer. Then as we are approaching the 3rd week, his family starts calling and asking if he's at work. He went missing, went on vacation, and never came back. I can only hope his story has a happy ending, because we never heard from him again. I had an employee tell me he had to go home because he had an abscess on his gum. Curiously, I asked if he could show me. He had a fat chaw on his lip and claimed that was the abscess. I literally facepalmed. Another employee said she was car sick and couldn't come into work. I replied, "You mean hungover?" She refused and really pushed to miss work. I worked a triple shift because of her. "Thanks, Cassie." "That's nice of you." My boss wouldn't let me leave work early even though my stepdad's son was murdered by getting shot in the head. My family, and I wanted to be there for my stepdad, even to just drop him off the airport as a family. But no, apparently my $8 is too important. Not a manager, just a firefighter in New England. My deputy chief recorded a fellow coworker calling out during the Boston Bruins playoff run. He called up at 1 a.m. completely hammered, telling the deputy chief that he couldn't come in for his shift at 7 a.m. because he had Bruins fever. He proceeded to yell, "It took a time," and hung up. My deputy chief was beside himself, asked no questions, and put him out sick. I have two from the same employee. She called in one day because she didn't have any clean shirts for work. I told her to come in anyway, and I'd give her a new one. The very next day, she called in because she said she was at the lake and sat in an ant pile and couldn't come in because she had ants in her pants. I don't know if the excuse was real or not. I assume it was because I never saw him again, but when I called an employee because he was no-show for his shift, either a housemate or family member, this was over a decade ago, so I don't recall, told me that the employee couldn't come into work because he was in jail. Most horrifying call-out I happened to overhear. I'm in our scheduling office, and I'm doing some kind of paperwork for a vacation request or something. The phone rings, and one of the schedulers picks up the phone. There is hysterical sobbing and screaming, a lot of okay, calm down. Just take the day off. I'll cover it. Calm down. I give the scheduler a weird look. She hangs up the phone. Apparently a girl woke up to her period. Blood all over her new white sheets. Soaked into her mattress. Ruined her underwear and pajamas. And to make matters worse, she didn't have any tampons. Her car was in the shop, and she only had her bike. I felt terrible for her. I asked who it was. As luck would have it, I knew the girl. Lived in the same apartment complex as me. Drove to the store about 15 minutes later, bought enough pads and tampons, toilet paper and Midol to last her for a whole week, and dropped it off. I was a superhero for that day. Felt cool. Years ago, I had someone call in and tell me that they couldn't come to work this week because they were grounded. They were 25 years old at the time. I told them that this wasn't an acceptable excuse and that they would be expected to work their scheduled shifts. So he put his mom on the phone, and we had a nice long chat. He did live at home, and she was grounding him, and said if we couldn't respect her parenting decisions, then he quit. I kind of felt bad for the kid. TLDR, Rabbit Fox. When I was in Colorado, I lived in an apartment with a hallway open to the outdoors. The lady across the hall had a very bad habit of putting smelly trash outside her door until she felt like carrying it to the dumpster. A few of us complained a lot, but the apartment complex never did anything about it. One day, I was rushing out my door to get to work, and when I opened my door, there was a fox eating her trash. I tried to shoo it away, but it got really aggressive and backed me up into my apartment. I shut the door laughing for a minute and figured it would eat and be on its way. Opened the door a few minutes later, and it is still there, growling at my door. Went on like this for a while, and I called into work telling them that I would be late. Too bad this was before cell phones had cameras, or I would have snapped a pic. Also called animal control because I thought it might have been rabid. It was not normal behavior. About an hour later, I was able to leave my apartment and go to work. My manager told me that at his old store, this new guy called in and was like, "Guys, my iPod broke. Y'all don't understand. If I have to go without my music, I'ma go nuts. Y'all don't get it. I'm serious. This ain't funny." The great thing is the store we work at fixes cell phones and iPods and the like. Had an employee call me at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. Drunk. Crying. My girlfriend was in a car accident. I can't be in tomorrow. She's going to the hospital, and I have to be there. This is a guy that called in once every 2 weeks, so I press for info. "Oh no. Is she okay or seriously hurt?" "I don't know," he replies. "How's she getting to the hospital?" I ask. "I don't know. Did she call you and tell you she was in an accident?" I ask. Her sister called me. "The car is totaled. She's hurt bad." I let him have the day off because I'm not an asshole. But I don't believe him. He comes by Tuesday and gives me more bullshit about the accident. About a week after that, I see he drove a different car to work. I ask about the new car. He says it's his girlfriend's car. I say it's already fixed. He says fixed. I fired him. Over the call-ins. Had a guy call in because the weather is too nice and I don't want to stop drinking. Had a guy call in because he ran over an armadillo. It did actually total his car. Had a girl come in crying, asking to leave immediately because her so was in the ICU. I had another employee drive her to the hospital, and the only other person not scheduled that night wouldn't come in because it wasn't her problem, and she just didn't feel like it. I called in when my dad was in a coma and had a manager tell the rest of my staff. He didn't believe me. I told him I really didn't give a fuck. One girl couldn't come in because the taxis were running late. She lives a 10-minute walk away, and there is also a bus, but she won't take public transportation. Another girl called in because she had too many hickeys, and we had already written her up for working with hickeys. I have so many. One guy called to say he couldn't come to work because he was waiting for the heating oil company to make an emergency delivery and restart his oil-fired furnace. A fellow employee who had just been there to his place said, "That's odd, because he lives in an apartment with electric baseboard heat." Used to be a manager of a fairly large, very low-paying call center. Had one girl who we had just hired call me, in tears, telling me that she had just been stabbed by her baby daddy and wouldn't be able to come to work. I'm a bit shocked and tell her not to worry about work and to make sure she and her kid get stuff figured out. 2 days later, she shows up at work and is showing off her stab wound. Turns out she had just gone out drinking and somehow cut her lower abdomen. A lot of square footage there. Could have been anything, and decided to turn lemons into lemonade. I got lied to all the time when people were calling out, but I kind of resented this one because she had made me get all worried about her and stuff. We had a new cook at our restaurant a couple years ago. This guy was probably mid to late 20s, and he just wasn't very good at his job. Through his 3 training days, it was obvious that he was going to struggle to keep up with the pace once he was working on his own. His first shift on his own comes on a semi-busy Friday night, and he just couldn't get through it. Other cooks had to step over when they were available and help him put together his salads and apps. By the end of the night, he was definitely crying a bit. The next day he calls in and says he has to quit because he has cancer. It's tough to question cancer, but that was some interesting timing. Background. I used to live in a very rural area. The worst excuse I ever heard was this 17-year-old kid who had his friend call in claiming to be his uncle, to say that he was needed at home because the cows had gotten out and needed to be rounded up. The manager that took the call told the employee, "I don't believe this for a second, but I can't stop you from leaving." He stayed and finished his shift. I had to email into a college class because my neighbor's chickens had gotten out and were all over the road. I came in late and the prof believed me because I was really sheepish about it and smelled like gross yard livestock. I'm sure he tells people about that call-in now. I could see him struggling not to laugh. I was in a rich kid business program, so he didn't hear that kind of thing much. Grocery store manager here. I wanted a girl that didn't show up one day, and late the day after until I saw her bruises. Nothing crazy, just one on her face and neck that I saw. I asked WTF happened, and she starts crying and said her dad had beat the shit out of her in a fight she was having about her newborn daughter. Girl was an absolute sweetheart, and I offered to help her out and even stay at my house if needed. She refused and quit the following week without notice. I hope she's doing all right. On the flip side, had another girl call in and say she'll be late. I say no problem, we're not busy. She gets there, and I mildly inquired what happened. OMG, there was a sale I couldn't walk away from at Plato's Closet. I've been there all morning. My face must have been priceless. TL, her. One girl couldn't walk away from her sale. One got beat up by her dad, the fuck. I used to answer the management line as I worked the night shift, and people would call in early to say they weren't in. There were lots of people who'd clearly been on a night out and got in at 5/6 a.m. and just call in sick. The best though was a guy whose conversion went like this. "It's Bob." He wasn't really Bob. "I'm not going to be in today. Can you let my manager know?" "Yeah, sure. What's the problem?" "I'm in jail. They've got the wrong person. They should have arrested my brother, but they don't believe I have a twin. I'm using my one phone call to let you know I probably won't be in." I live in the South, so some people don't handle winter weather very well. We always have call-ins when there is a very small amount of snow or ice, but by far the worst example was when one employee called in to say that his apartment stairs were too icy and that he was afraid that he would slip. This was an early 20s, very able-bodied man, and it was quite obvious that he just didn't want to come in. A woman I supervised had planned a multi-week out-of-state vacation and had asked for the time off. I approved it. A few weeks before she left, we realized that she hadn't accrued enough vacation time for all of the time she wanted off by one day. She decided that she'd come back one day early, and that day was a Friday. Since it was a road trip and no flights had to be changed, I asked her if she'd rather leave a day later, so that she'd have the weekend off too. That way she could extend her vacation by a couple of days. "No, it's okay," she said. She'd be back in the office on Friday. Fast forward to early Friday morning, like 2:30 a.m. of the Friday, she was supposed to be back to work. She had called and left a voicemail on my work line with an extremely exaggerated hoarse voice telling me that she got back into town, but she was sick and wouldn't be able to come into work on Friday. Yeah, right. She showed up to work on Monday morning just as chipper as usual. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.